What is up, harvesters? Welcome back to the returning viewers, and if you're brand new here, welcome to Hobby Harvest. My name is Ken. So today I want to talk to you guys about 7 ways that food plots can fail. Now we're going to be focused primarily on first year food plots here, because if you're brand new to food plotting, there's a lot that you probably don't know that you don't know, and we're going to cover that in this video so that you go into your first season preparing food plots without all of these unknowns. So this is also going to be really useful for those of us who are putting in a new food plot this year, and just all of us who have been putting in food plots forever, as just a reminder of things to keep in mind so they don't slip through our fingers as we're maybe focused on other things instead of these basics of just making sure that our food plots are very successful this year. So let's get into it. So the first thing when you are putting in a food plot that you really need to consider is your sunlight. Every single plant needs sunlight to grow, and every single plant grows much better if it has more sunlight. So if you're putting your food plot out in an open field like I have in southeastern Wisconsin, I didn't have to really do anything to add more sunlight to that food plot. It was already out in the open. It was going to get 100% sunlight from sunup to sundown every day, and that plot is very lush every year because it gets so much sunlight. Now, my northeastern Wisconsin property, that is almost a completely wooded parcel, and that property comes with a lot of chainsaw time in order to put food plots in. So when you're putting these food plots in the woods or just other areas where you might have some trees or brush where you want to put the food plot, you definitely need to get those trees and that brush cleared out of that area that food plot's going to be. But you also want to make sure that you leave a little extra space on the side. So cut down those trees even further off of where you plan the edges of the food plot to be. And we'll get into that later, but primarily that's so that you can feather those edges and have some screening along the edge and a transitional area off the edges of your food plots, which is going to make the deer want to come into it, instead of if it's just an opening in the woods that has something planted in it. Now, the other thing you want to do when you're clearing these trees out of the area is stand on your food plot. If you're in the northern hemisphere like most of us are, look to the south, put your arms up in like a 45-degree angle, and you're going to want to remove any of that canopy that's to the south as well, because the sun is going to travel to the south of you from east in the morning to west at night, and you're going to want to make sure there aren't any big mature trees to the south of your food plots that are blocking or shading out that food plot from the motion of the sun when it travels throughout our growing season. So just take a look when you're out there where the sun kind of is in the sky at noon, or late morning or early afternoon, and kind of just draw that line in the sky to the south of you, and know that any of that big canopy that's up there, you're going to want to get that cleared out so you get maximum sun down into these plots so that they are as lush as possible. Now, number 2 on the list is, of course, your soil. So once you get that sunlight down there, you're going to want to make sure that the roots of your plants are growing in really nice soil. So go out, get that soil test, especially if this is a first year food plot. You really have no idea what you're dealing with in there. If you are putting these in the woods and there's ferns growing in there, that means there's acidic soil in there. So what happens in the woods is years and years and generations and however long this forest has been there, every year those leaves fall, they go into the soil, and they really increase the carbon of the soil, and that's going to make it really hard to plant those like leafy green, like very attractive food plot plants in there if there's a high carbon level in there, because you're going to want to get that nitrogen level up in there, and you're also going to want to make sure that the soil itself isn't too acidic. So you're going to want to balance that pH with something like lime by bringing that in there as well. So once you get that soil test, they'll tell you exactly what you need to do to get that soil right for the thing that you're planting in the food plot. And you're going to at least make sure that that box is checked and you don't have to worry about your soil. Now, you do want to, year after year, also check your soil, because it can get out of whack from year to year, depending on what you're doing. I have other videos on how to like plant summer cover crops and use like green manure to really get that like nitrogen back in the soil by like putting in things like buckwheat or using things like winter rye and such to like really help your soil out naturally, instead of having to keep carrying in more and more products like fertilizers and lime and stuff to keep your soil right. So you can go check out those videos, but just make sure you're getting that soil right so that we get these plants the maximum growth and the maximum lushness that we can get them, so that they are very attractive to the deer herd. Now, the third thing on the list is what else do plants need? Well, they need water. Now, a lot of times here, you're going to just have to pray for rain. And the reason for this is I did a video, I think it was last year, of how much water you actually need to get onto a food plot in order to get it to grow to maturity. And so we'll just take rye off of this list for now. So you need 10 inches of rain throughout your growing season to get rye to maturity. Now, that is a lot of water. A single inch of rain over an acre of land is more than 27,000 gallons of water. So if we're trying to get 10 inches of water on rye, that means that we're going to need what would be the equivalent of 38 semi-tankers full of water on an acre of rye in order to grow it to maturity. Now, that is just an absolute insane amount of water. And so a lot of guys might think, oh, I'll just, get a Gaylord on the back of my side-by-side and throw some water on the plot. Yeah, every little bit helps, obviously, but you are not going to solely water your plot with bringing in water, especially if it is back in the woods. It's this little honey hole food plot you put in there. Yeah, every little bit helps, but just know that you're really going to need to pray for rain. So really be watching that forecast. Make sure you're going to be planting in front of a rain so that that seed gets wet right away as soon as it gets put down. But also just be watching your future forecast that you're not about to plant into a drought or something. Look at what your average rainfalls are for your area year to year as well, and that'll give you a good heads up of when a good time to plant. Usually August is a very wet month, and that's typically when we're going to be planting food plots because we want them to be young and nice and tender for the hunting season, not old and mature and undesirable to the deer when we're trying to hunt them, because they're going to be competing with egg fields in your area. And you want the nice young tender stuff in your plot while that egg field is nearing harvesting. So it's getting dried out and it's mature and it's not as leafy and green and nice and delicious for the deer anymore. So you're going to pull them out of those egg fields with this nice young tender food plot. So that, of course, gets me into number 4, which is your plant selection. So you always want to plant something in your food plot that is not being planted in your area. So for example, you do not want to plant corn next to an egg field. That is corn. You don't want to plant beans next to a soybean field. You don't want to plant clover right next to a clover hay field. So be conscious of what's in your area and really take advantage of that. And so you have that extra sweet piece of candy that the deer herd can't get anywhere else. And they're going to come to your food plot for that. Now, I like to mix a lot of things. So my favorite food plot blend is my own that I make. I go to the feed and seed and I buy bags and I mix my own seed. And I like to use forage soybeans, forage peas. I like to dress that with a cereal grain, whatever's cheaper, just as a nurse crop so the deer don't buzz down my pea and bean plants when they just poke out of the ground, because if they do that, they're going to kill them all. So I want that cereal grain to come up to give the deer something to munch on first. I usually have been using oats the last few years for that because it's just been cheaper than the rye and the wheat and whatever else has been available. But then I also like to do half of my plot in brassicas. So don't think that you have to plant the entire plot in the same seed mix. I plant half of it in brassicas and half of it in beans, peas, and oats in order to have a diversity of the plot so that at any time of year when those oats or when that cereal grain just pop out of the ground, it's very attractive to the deer herd, and they'll come and nip off of that instead of hopefully those beans and peas. But then eventually those beans and peas start to get established and get like nice and lush, and then they'll be pounding those about the time that bow season starts into about the rut. Then those brassicas are going to really start being attractive to them once we start getting some of those really cold nights. And so those brassicas will actually take them all the way through winter. So will the rest of those beans and peas if they haven't completely buzzed them to the ground. But if there's enough lush material in there, they will keep buzzing on those all through the winter. And if you can get them into the winter with a full belly, you're really going to help your deer herd make it through the winter in the like snow belt areas around the Great Lakes. And that's going to really help you have a better deer herd coming into the next year. And you'll end up seeing more deer year after year by doing that as well. And then also when you decide on what you're going to plant in your plots, just keep in mind that each of those things get planted at a different time. So like those beans, peas, oats, brassicas, those get planted like later in the summer. We're talking like August for the Wisconsin area where I am. If you're planting clover or stuff like that, you can actually frost seed clover like right about now if you haven't already, and that'll actually come up in the spring after the ground thaws out and it has a chance to like really get into the ground. The ground gets really wet in the spring, and then that'll come up at that time too. So just make sure you're looking at the time of year you should be planting something in a plot based on what seed you're planting, because food plot planting times are much different than like if you were trying to grow soybeans in order to harvest them, because we're not trying to harvest the soybeans. We're trying to put them in the ground and have them be nice, young, and tender during the hunting season, because our whole calendar is around that hunting season, not necessarily a harvest time. Now, the number 5 reason of why you might have a failed food plot is you get it in, you did all of these other things perfectly, it's coming up, it's looking really nice, and all of a sudden, the deer buzz it down to absolutely nothing. I've had this happen a bunch of times on my northwestern Wisconsin food plots. I'm still fighting it a little bit. I need to just keep adding acres and acres of food plots in order to hold a solid growth in all of them, because the deer herd itself completely gets pulled from every direction when those food plots get going, and I have every deer in the county, it seems, buzzing on my food plots, which is great, but then they buzz them to the ground, and then I'm not left with anything to head into the later season. So to fix that, you do want to put in more acres of food plots. So for a 40-acre parcel, you would be looking at doing about 2 acres of food. And if that's in the woods, that's a lot of tree cutting. So just keep in mind that you really are trying to have acres of food equal to what your deer herd and your deer pressure is in the area, so that they don't just buzz it all to the ground right away. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that by selecting what you do plant in those plots can really help the browse pressure as well. So in northwestern Wisconsin, I plant pretty much exclusively winter rye. And the reason for that is, first of all, it's cold tolerant to a lot lower temperature than the rest of the stuff we would typically plant in food plots. So up there, that's great. It keeps it green and lush a lot longer into the season. But it's also because when you plant something like a cereal grain, if it grows a couple inches long and then the deer nip it off, it still keeps growing. Where if I plant like beans and peas up there, the deer are just going to nip them off and completely kill that plant, and I'm not going to have a continued growth. So I really do like to up my chances of having a solid food plot up there by planting something like winter rye. I've continually played around with my seeding rates up there. I think I had some plots at somewhere around 200 pounds of winter rye per acre. I've also tried layering the seeding, meaning I seeded some, let it grow, seeded some more, let it grow, so you have all this different rye in there at different ages. I haven't perfected that yet. I will continue to tell you guys my successes and failures with that, for how much pressure I get in those big north woods, in that snow belt, where those deer are coming, like I said, it seems from the entire county to come to my food plots to get that nice leafy green, because it is nothing but trees as far as the eye can see in every direction from where that parcel is. So they don't have something nice and attractive like that. So of course it's going to bring them in from all surrounding areas. And just one last point on this part is that if you do want to see how your browsing pressure is, you can put an exclusion cage on your food plot. So that is to put just some fenced off area. It can even be just like a box with some fencing on the top of it so that rain and sunlight can still get in there and that part will grow. But it excludes everything from being able to eat on that area. And you'll actually see, if you guys go online, you can see that some guys are showing pictures of their exclusion cages and seeing just how much growth is inside the cage and how barren it is outside. And that'll really show you guys how much pressure is being applied to your food plots by your deer herd in the area. So 6, we want to talk about screening your food plot. So a great food plot is great and all, but let's say you put this food plot out in the middle of an open field and there's no cover whatsoever around it. Those deer, yeah, they're going to eat it, but they're going to eat it in the middle of the night, not during daylight hours when we can hunt. So you really want to make sure that these food plots are put where you can screen them easily, or you need to screen them easily. So you really want them to be tucked in somewhere, that nice little honey hole in the woods. So the other thing is, these don't have to be huge. When I said 2 acres of food plots per 40 acres of land, I would not put in a single 2-acre food plot. I would put in, like, say 4 half-acre food plots, or however. They all don't have to be the same size either. One of my most successful food plots is a 1/16 of an acre. It is a nice little honey hole in the woods. That food plot is 4 seasons old now, and it has had 7 bucks shot off of it or near it. So that's just been a really nice little kill plot. nice little honey hole in the woods, that small plot actually performs better for hunting than the bigger plots I have on the land, which are there just to kind of hold the herd in the area and keep some food there for them so they don't buzz all of my plots down to nothing. But those smaller ones are my favorite ones to hunt or hunt adjacent to. So like, again, I guess we should talk about that. You don't necessarily want to hunt over the top of food plots. You can, but usually hunting that main trail of movement in and out of a food plot's where you want to be set up, because it's just a much better area to have a nice shot on them, as well as not blow out the whole food plot by being right on top of it. But so there's 3 ways that we can screen food plots, and it's going to depend where they are. So if you're in an open field, you're going to be wanting to look at things like switchgrass, getting switchgrass established on the edges and the perimeter of that food plot. That switchgrass, after about 2 or 3 years, should be growing 6, 8+ feet tall and being nice, thick, and it will stand up well into the winter. If you do get a wet, heavy snow, it will knock it down. But once that snow kind of melts off of there, if you get a warm day, it'll kind of start to stand back up too. And so that's just great to have that like screen completely around your plot. But again, I always like feathered edges or transitioned edges off of your food plot. So like my southeastern Wisconsin food plot, being that it's in a big open area that has a ton of sunlight coming down to it, it has switchgrass around it, but then just off of that it has red osier dogwood shrubs planted around it as well. And so I know a lot of you guys have been watching my older red osier dogwood videos. They're doing really well on the channel right now, and it is that time of year as well. If you guys want to clone red osier dogwoods, get them plugged in as well. They do want to be in wet areas, so make sure you're doing this either in a wetter, marshy area, or just make sure that you're planting them like when we get into that rainy season, so that they're constantly getting rain and staying wet, so that they really have a good chance to develop a root system. But again, a great way to screen these food plots is to like have switchgrass followed by red osier dogwood, and then that can go off into the woods, however big your mature trees are in the area, depending on where you're at. Now, if you're trying to establish screening in the big woods, switchgrass probably isn't going to work out that well for you, because switchgrass and any grass in general needs a ton of sunlight to grow. And even if you do really open up that canopy, it's going to be a lot more challenging to get that grass to grow there. It also needs a ton of nitrogen, which you just do not have in the big woods, because you've been getting all that carbon coming down in those leaves for however many generations, and those rotting sticks and whatever as well. That's all carbon. That's not nitrogen. You need that nitrogen in the soil for grasses. So it's just going to be really hard to get grasses established in soil like that and in that lack of sun. So what you want to do instead is what I hinted at earlier in the video, is when you're opening up that canopy for your food plots in the woods, you're going to want to make it so that the sunlight's also hitting the surrounding forest floor, not just the food plot itself. Because what that's going to do is every little twig and every little suppressed growth that has been trying to struggle for sunlight and been being blocked out by that mature canopy that you got rid of is going to just boom and grow so fast and so lush. And you'll have all these little shrubs and stuff. On my northwestern Wisconsin property, we have a lot of tag alder. And that tag alder just booms when you get some sunlight down to it, and it's not being choked out by that high canopy. And that really helps to feather that edge off into the woods and really block everything so that the deer can't see in or out of that food plot. It makes them feel safe and secure while they're in there. And it really eliminates the stress that they have of trying to come into something like that to grab that bite to eat, when they might be worried that something can see them from far off in the woods while they're in there, while they have their head down, while they're eating, while they're feeling very vulnerable. Now, the third way that you can take care of this, and this doesn't matter where you are, if you're in the woods or in an open field, is to use topography. So that honey hole food plot that I told you about, that's 1/16 of an acre, that little food plot is completely surrounded on 3 sides by topography. It's almost like a meteor crater came in and kicked up all the dirt in 3 areas around it. We do call it the crater plot for that reason. Now, the open area, when I had to clear out all the brush, I just put my brush pile on that open spot that's not being covered by topography. Still lets the deer in and out easily. You do not want to make a horse corral when you're cutting down all these trees. Make sure they're kind of set aside in piles and the deer can still easily get in and out of the plot, even with the screening, because if they feel like they're trapped in there, they won't come in there either. So just keep that in mind as well. Now, the last reason that you may have a food plot failure is overpressure. So you put a new food plot in, you get a camera out there, and you feel you got to get out there and check that camera all the time. Well, first of all, just get a cell cam on a food source. That's just a good rule of thumb. Cell cams are relatively cheap now. A lot of the plans aren't that expensive as well. Just make sure you have the camera's settings set up correctly, that they're not just blasting you with a ton of photos or a ton of videos. That's what actually makes those policies cost a lot more. So just get an idea what's on that plot without going out there all the time. Don't overhunt them as well once the season starts. The more human scent and activity that you put on a food plot, the less likely they are to eat it and go to it at all. Now, you might find out, well, they're just going to it at night. Well, yeah, it's typically because you put too much pressure on it. Deer absolutely love to hit up their favorite food source right before dark. So if you notice that you put in this really attractive food source and they're not getting to it until after dark, it's probably because you're over pressuring it. Just stay away from it, stay off of it, let it cool down for a couple weeks, and then you can get back in there once they start coming in during the daylight right before dark again. But again, just be very conscious of your wind, your thermals, your everything. Don't be going in there putting scent all over everything. And just hold these food plots very sacred, because the deer do. And if you put too much human activity and scent out there, they're not going to come visit them during the daylight. And then what good are they to you? So just keep that in mind. That's also a good tip for just any hunting in general. The one way you can screw up any part of your hunt, any stand that you have, anything, is over pressuring it. That's the number one way you can screw it up. So just keep yourself out of there until it's time to go in there and have that successful hunt. I wish you guys a ton of success this summer planning for all of these food plots. I wish you guys a ton of success this fall on your hunts. And if you want to learn more about the number one reason why you're not seeing deer, check out this video. Otherwise, YouTube thinks you're going to love this one, so go check that out, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.